Unmute your mic, Patrick. Thanks for joining the webinar tonight with Patrick and I on developing a culture of digital citizenship. Nice to see that we're willing to devote that time this afternoon to what's going to improve our schools and the learning for our students and our school boards. As we go through today's, many of you have already started completing the Who Are We survey. I've been tracking the results, so it's a pretty good geographical sampling that we've got. Most important for Patrick and I when we were putting this workshop together was we wanted to get a good measure and gauge on what was the level of tech use or familiarity with some of the tools that we could be talking about today. So the emergings and the proficients are really, really good to see. As we get into today, and what's really good for you is several of us have included our Twitter handles on that document. And on our next slide, and you can download all of this as well, we're actually giving you view rights to the Google Sheets that created out of this. So you'll be able to reach out to anybody that shares the same special interest that you have, but definitely encourage you to add those Twitter handles to your PLN so that you can grow that even further with some of the people that are here today and will be participating with us. So it's a really good way to just keep learning with all of us around in our community here. Patrick, I'll pass it off to you for your first introduction.
Great. Thanks, Greg. So as you can see on the slide, that's Greg and I. And the interesting thing about the photo that is up there for me is that it's a lesson for me and a lesson for all of you out there, not to take selfies with someone else's mobile phone. I don't know how long ago I took that picture, but it was with Greg's phone when he wasn't looking. And so this is a cautionary tale about using someone else's cell phone to take photos of yourself. But I am the principal of innovation here in the Simcoe County District School Board, which is a great job. It's an interesting position to be in. I have quite a bit of autonomy in terms of what my job is day to day, and I work with an amazing group of people, and we have a lot of people equate what I do to technology, but a lot of our work is about innovative teaching practices as well as new devices. So really looking forward to today and working with Greg and seeing what this group comes up with.
Thanks, Patrick. I learned a valuable lesson that same day. It was in November, Patrick, in Ottawa. I'm never going to lend my phone out to Patrick again. Thankfully, it was only that photo that he took and didn't try to get anything else when I wasn't looking. I get the wonderful opportunity of being vice principal for Peel Alternative School here in Peel District School Board. In my role, we look after our traditional alternative school. That's our essentially grade 10 through 11 and 12 courses there. We run 3 different hub sites across our region in Mississauga and Brampton. I also get the opportunity to also help and oversee with our Safe Schools program here in Peel. Fresh Start, we call it. So we look after that and do a lot of proactive work with some of our at-risk, or I should say in-risk students. And at the same time, we also look after several other alternative programs for students with most social emotional health issues and needs. And we are always fighting here at Peel Alternative School to try to provide our students with more than your typical alternative education and pushing them into the areas of moving ahead and developing the skills that they're going to need to be successful as we move even further into the 21st century. Thank you. I don't know how many people did participate in the previous webinars. I know several of the forerunners before us did some really good content. Some really good examples were used. We've switched things up a little bit in using some of the Google Forms and everything to do some of our sharing and reflection and work to do afterwards. We've tried to build on the first 3 that were presented. The strategies to promote collaborative inquiry was really interesting, and Patrick and I got to take a look at those files because Ben was very helpful and shared them with us. So we're trying to change it up and not duplicate for those that have been through all the sessions. Some similarity between us and the second one with using tech to develop 21st century competencies. That's it within the students, and we're showing how we can model that kind of skill development as a leader in our schools for our staff and building our digital citizenship and our digital footprint. And of course, then the third one was building teacher capacity and technology, and a lot of that's going to be covered today as we go through the modeling with you and how we're going to demonstrate what are some of the really good tools to use in building your footprint and being a positive digital citizen. To keep in mind with our title today, realistically, we've going to be focusing on your digital footprint and digital citizenship. But as we go through and we talk about the tools as one thing, and they kind of surround that whole footprint and they make that footprint up, what we're really talking about is the development of key skills that are going to last beyond those tools. So even if you look at some of the icons that are there, some of them are still current, some have already changed and move on. So we want to really work on how do we develop the skills, use one app in present time, and then how do we use that skill again when the new version or new and more improved apps come up as we go. So that's one of the key things that we need to take away today. Patrick, over to you.
Sure. I'm just putting the link to that survey if people haven't had a chance yet to add in their where they're from and their level of kind of interest. I just put the link in the chat so you can have a look at it. So the webinar description is pretty much right out of the brochure and what Greg and I had kind of looked at doing. But one of the things you're going to hear about over the course of the next kind of half hour to 45 minutes is around starting where people are and taking them as far as you can take them in the time you've got them. And so while Greg and I do that in our day-to-day work, we're going to attempt to do that today as well. So if you haven't had a chance to fill out that form, go ahead and click on that. So on to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the our learning goals for today. So Ben, if you could move on to the next slide, or I can do that, sorry. Right, so just 3 simple goals for today. We want to not only explain or talk about what digital citizenship looks like in 2016, or what citizenship looks like, but we want to co-create some of that with the people that are online today. Again, I mentioned talking about meeting people where they are, and in this case, it's not just your community, it's the learners in your building and the staff that you get to work with every day. So it's one of those cases where we have all these great strategies that we expect teachers to use with kids, and sometimes we forget that they're also great strategies for us to use as leaders. So knowing our learner in a classroom, it's just as important as a leader to know your staff and to know your community, and then figure out where they are, meet them there, and then take them as far as you can in the time you've got them. And then the last one there, the last goal is just to, with your help, build a resource of tools that we can all use to help communicate, collaborate, and grow citizenship.
One of the things we look at here is 2 people driving the presentation, so we'll have some of those hiccups as we go throughout. Backseat driver here, I clicked ahead as Patrick was doing it as well. As far as the applicability or the connections to the Ontario Leadership Framework, as we went through today, I definitely only pulled out a couple for today. As you pull that document up and take a look at what that framework, there are numerous connections that you can make. I just wanted to start out one as far as it came to building relationships and developing people. As you look at all of this, it's really easy to take a look at how you can recognize some of the accomplishments of staff that you have in your building just by using some of the tools. And I just thought, as I was even typing that up really quickly, one of the best ways you can do is simply walking into somebody's classroom, and all you're going to do is you can take pictures, you tweet out what they're doing, you talk about what the students are doing, and even simpler than that is on our next slide is just you have no idea how impactful it is when you see a retweet or a favorite from your principal as a teacher, even as a student doing work. And I've done it here in our building using our hashtag where students have completed a piece of artwork or a really cool assignment. You take that picture, it goes up on your hashtag. We put it up on our LFD screen with our Twitter stream going. It's very impactful that way, and it honors their contributions to the learning environment. We've got several superintendents engaged on Twitter as well, and it's amazing how many times they take the effort to go through and actually favorite and like and retweet things that staff have done. And it's come back around that, oh, wow, they're actually watching what we're doing. They know what's going on in the classroom. So that has a really good positive impact on the climate of your school. The other thing that it helps with too is actually getting that professional development going and capacity of staff. And that's what we have to do here even in our own schools, and I think about that here, is I may be pushing the agenda at my school, but sometimes, well, I can't guarantee I'm always going to be here, so I want to work on that building capacity. And just by modeling what's going on, and I just constantly hope that we're getting that climate in place and the culture, more importantly, that's going to encourage staff to really try some of the new practices that we've been talking about and things that we've been modeling. And definitely a good merger with our school improvement plan or our school success plan as well. Some more simple ones as you go through and you're talking about developing the organization, some really good key takeaways. Here for us aren't the hardest thing as you go through. I always think to myself that probably the greatest tool for improving schools has nothing to do with technology. What we're talking about is relationships and the culture in your school. So when you look at culture of digital citizenship, that's truly what you're doing, and you're going to create that collaborative nature for your school where staff are going to jump on board with initiatives that you have. Realistically, some of the tools we're showing you today, it's really going to be able to look, if you look at number 2, provide staff the opportunity to contribute and give input into initiatives or new directions that are going on. In our school board, we're looking at doing our 21C teaching and learning revisioning, and we've reached out to all employee groups using various different technology to get input and opinions that way. Number 3, one of the most powerful impacts we have is that reaching outside of our own school to the school community. We're creating windows into our hallways, windows into our classrooms, and that's allowing our community, our trustees, our parents, even some local MPs and counselors are seeing what's actually happening inside our schools. And even here today, as far as the 4th point on the slide's concerned, no one here in this chat room needs to understand how powerful it is when you start engaging in this and the collaborative skills you develop as you make these connections, whether you're using Adobe Connects here, Go, or Microsoft Link. Tons of information, tons of good benefit for our learners as we go through. So those are some of the basic connections that you get to the leadership framework out of what we're going to be doing today. There you go, Patrick.
Thanks, Greg. I was going to say too, when you were talking about the points about connecting to your community, we have these times in our day and in our weeks where we can tell the story of what's happening in our schools or in our school districts. And I think we need to be mindful that we take those opportunities to tell our story, because if we don't, then we know someone else is going to tell the story for us. And so it doesn't always have to be on the school website or on a blog or on Twitter. It could be in the hallway or in the playground, wherever they are. And the slide that's up there now kind of speaks to what I was talking about earlier, that if your school community is one where there's a large group of parents who are not going to see your message on Twitter or on the website, you may need to find them in the playground or in the hallways. There's lots of things to do at the beginning of the school day and lots of competing interests or looking for the principal in the morning. But if they really want to find you, they can find you on the schoolyard just as easily as they can find you in the office. So taking those opportunities, I think, is huge to meet your community where they are. Did it again, Greg.
Yeah. So what we were talking about as we started talking about tools and what was available was really talking about pedagogy first and what's the learning that we have to have happen. And as it applies to our workshop webinar here today, what we're really looking at is how are we going to change the learning in our schools, and even more realistically, how are we going to change the working? How are we going to use those tools and those skills to change what we do inside our schools and our classrooms and our school boards? And the one thing, as far as it goes, before you pick any tool, we'll get into this in a little bit more in depth later, it's what is the actual impact I want to have, and then start thinking about what tool you want. Don't find that cool tool that exists out there and say, I want to use this, and then try to figure out how to use it in your school afterwards. Set the purpose first, and this is where it comes from. The George Couros quote is, don't worry about what devices you should buy, what is that learning that you want to have happen? And that's exactly what Patrick and I did as we went through designing this webinar today. What's the learning that we want to have? What kind of opportunities do we want to present? And then we went back in and started talking about the tools. As you come down to it, we talked about the digital footprint image earlier on today. we're not really talking about tools. What we're talking about is acquiring those important skills and competencies that are going to make us as successful educators and our students successful in our courses that they take with us in school and the classes we have with them, and make them even more successful once they leave our buildings. One of the key things we're going to talk about here is managing change that happens around the world today. Very good case in point, just as an example, here on my school board, I think about some of the major changes that we've done. I remember back when they switched us from Outlook 2010 to the Outlook web app with very little care, practice, concern, support provided. It was an uproar, a simple little thing, and staff were upset, emails weren't getting sent, things like that. And then when we switched from, I think it was Windows XP to Windows 7, the major concerns that happened, how upset people were because we didn't actually take on those skills. And as they started working on it, just this past January the 25th, we switched and updated our intranet here on the board. And at that point, we had had enough change that we'd grown accustomed to it, and all the staff and students were able to actually handle that switchover. And it wasn't the same uproar and upheaval in our practice and our board as we developed those skills moving forward. So the more change we work with, the better we're going to be able to adapt to it later on. As we start gearing up and talking about the context for today, what we try to do is set it into things that have been going on. And we've already started talking about how important the skills are, even more so than the tools. So we're just thinking about all this stuff that's gone on. You've seen the 4 C's. You might see at a workshop where they talk 3 C's. You've got 6 C's. You've got Fullen's 6 C's to deeper learning. There's several frameworks that are around. The framework for 21st century, where they've actually identified 18 key skills that you need to have. So it gets overwhelming at times. And then we talk about when we may have this cool vision for what learning needs to look like in our school or our board, and then how we're going to get there. And you start doing all this research, taking a look at the ISTE standards that are there, a good scaffolding mechanism, P21's framework they have out for 21st century learning. You get the C21 framework, and of course many of us are going to have experience dealing with TPAC, the TIM model, or even SAMR, about how you can evolve your practice using technology in the classroom. And it has been becoming overwhelming because in our province we're getting kind of bombarded by outside forces and not sure in what direction we wanted to go. And there hadn't been a lot of clarity for us provided in recent times until as we started working and hearing rumors of a document coming out, and the ministry did help roll that out this past winter. Patrick.
Thanks, Greg. So the document that's on the screen now is the 21st Century Competencies document that Greg's talking about, and it came out to some of us by surprise that it actually arrived on my desk one day, and pleasantly surprised to see it. But the questions I'm getting from school principals are, what's the rollout of this document looking like, and how does it connect to what we're already doing, or is it going to be a completely new initiative? So if you haven't seen it yet, feel free to click on that link and find yourself a copy. But what we're going to be looking at today, Greg mentioned that we're looking at the webinars that came before us and thinking about the ones that are coming next. So Greg and I have kind of made a decision that we're going to look at 3 of the competencies today. We're going to look at communication, collaboration, and global citizenship. And we're going to look at those in the context of how do they impact the work of the leader. And I'll put the link back for you there. There you go. You can also find it on EduGains. So if you just search 21st Century Competencies Ontario, it's the first hit you're going to get, and it'll come up to the EduGains site, and then you can, Greg's put the link in there. Terrific. So we're going to look at those 3 today, and then in our May webinar, we're going to have a look at the second 3.
So Patrick highlighted the collaboration, communication, global citizenship for you. We'll kind of follow that order. We thought because our whole purpose was, the context was global citizenship as our title, it made sense to kind of end that as our last competency to look at. It doesn't really matter. As you see, as we go through and talk about collaboration, what you're really doing is establishing your footprint there, and communication the same way. So we'll get through to that as we go. We just provided a good summary from the document for you, what they're actually looking at for that competency, for that skill area. So even when it came to collaboration, we're talking about the participation in teams, learning, contributing to a group of others, learning from others, the co-constructing knowledge, and that's what we're building on today through some of our activities. The various roles that you're going to do, flipping back and forth, all that as far as collaboration goes. Communication, as we all know, it's flexible contexts. I'm not very good at it, but the French and English, something I definitely need to work on. Also, as well, it's communication. I got this from an ESL teacher a long time ago. Communication has two forms. It's our in communication, our listening, what input we have, reading, and then it's also communication as far as our output's concerned. So we need to consider that as well. And then, of course, as we go into the global citizenship, how are we contributing to the digital community online? How do we contribute locally, internationally, that type of idea? What are we doing for the community? And what are we doing to create that positive digital footprint for ourselves? And that's important to do. Patrick already mentioned about telling your story. So what really we're talking about today is, yeah, we can be telling our school story, but at the same time, we're building our own story, and we're going to be the authors of that, not letting someone else do it for us.
Thanks, Greg. And so what you're looking at now is just a progression that we kind of made up for just for the purposes of this this webinar. What we're about to do is ask you to help co-create some documents with us around how we use tools to support communication, collaboration, and citizenship. And one of the questions you're going to be asked in that form that you're about to fill out is whereabouts do you think this tool, or the way you're using this tool, where does it fit on this progression? And so the example that we've got up for you there has 4 categories. So there's emerging for the folks that are just starting out using that tool. There's developing, where you're starting to find more features, starting to build it into your work. And then there's proficient, where it's fully integrated into what you're doing. And then there's the what next is what we added as a, there are always people, and there are probably people here today who use tools that the rest of us use for one thing, and they found a new use for it. And sometimes it's not even an intended use of the developer. People will find fantastic things to do with tools that the developer had not planned on. So the example we gave there is Twitter. So if you are going to use Twitter as the tool that you want to talk about in the document for communication, you find on that progression where do you think you are, and plot your tool on there and give a little description about how it is that that tool can help. So on this slide, you're going to see the link to the form. So we're going to take a few minutes, and Greg and I will just let you have some think time and some time to fill out the form. If you click on that link, it's going to open a Google form, and it's going to ask you a couple of questions. It's going to say, is the tool you're thinking of, do you want to talk about how you use it for collaboration, communication, or citizenship? Then it's going to ask you to plot it on that continuum, and I can flip back to that, that slide once people have got the link. And then it's going to ask you what the name of the tool is and how you use it. And so what we're actually doing by filling out that form, we're creating a collaborative kind of crowdsourced document of resources that we can all take away at the end around how we use those tools. So the link to the form is now in the chat, so I'm going to put it back to the progression. So we're going to give you a few minutes to open up that form and add your tools. What I'd really like is if you have a couple, feel free to fill out the form multiple times. The other thing that Greg and I spoke about earlier when we were talking about this session was there's multiple entry points for every tool for every person. So you may, if you're going to say use Twitter for this example, you may put yourself in developing or proficient, but then you find another tool that you're just starting out with, and you might put that one in emerging. So feel free to add a couple of different tools to the different categories. We're going to give you 5 minutes or so just to do that. And while that's happening, we'll put up the results page so you can have a look at what's coming through in the document. So off you go.
Patrick, did you want to share your screen, or would you like me to get Ben to share my screen? So just as you go there, I've opened up the documents that are being created as you're completing the Google form. Um, we decided, I think Patrick mentioned, not to include names, just as a safety mechanism. Really like the Google Plus edition there. I know I've struggled at times in figuring out how I use that tool more effectively. I know it's something I'm going to want to take a look at. Our go-to one, we've mentioned it twice there now, the Google Apps for Education and Google Docs. Definitely a game changer for us. Any cloud-based software that we're able to use in our classrooms, whether it's Google Apps for Education or Office 365, it has a huge impact. We've used it extensively in our Alt-Ed program now with our alternative students, and are really moving things forward with that with the shared doc. So those are really good. Just taking a look at our global citizenship and building some of that. Facebook is something I have finally been kicking around personally a bit more than I ever had, and definitely whatever video conferencing software you're talking about, mystery Skypes and Google Hangouts alike around the world with stuff for some of the great ideas that have been mentioned already. And then the last one in communication, we're all jumping in on those. Definitely, probably my biggest learning curve and development was jumping onto Twitter, using it for my PL and my own professional learning, not so much as my early years in Twitter, as I was the VP investigating my high school students to see what they were doing on social media and kind of lurking in the bushes in the background that way. I'm going to just go back to the chat now and into our Adobe Connects and back to our presentation.
Thanks, Greg. The other thing I think too is if you have colleagues that aren't here today that you know might be interested in supporting that document, feel free to send them that link and they can fill out the form and build that document to make it even better.
So you can keep, as we go throughout here, Patrick and I are going to be sharing some of our tools that we like to use as well and thought would have a pretty good impact for you. So keep going through as you come up with new ideas as we're talking. You can add to that form as we continue our presentation. I know we've talked about the tools and we've already kind of mentioned it. Is it all about the tools? And on the left on the screen right now is applies for students and applies for our teachers and for us as well. Yeah, technology is great, but as far as the mix of what we need to do in learning, it's all about, this says Legos and scented markers and handstands and having fun and books. It's about the balance. And I always talk about technology is great, but it's the right mix. And you have to use it in the right avenue, in the right area at that given time when it is the best thing that's available for you to use. The image on the right, you've probably seen this around before. Bill Farrader out of the United States uses the Twitter handle Plug Us In, had designed it initially, and then a collaboration with him and George Couros really kind of sat on it. And what it's good for us to take a look at is what do you want your leaders, the people that are in this webinar tonight, to do with technology? So yeah, the good answers are over there, and that's kind of what we're talking about. Use Google Apps, write a blog post, create a spreadsheet, develop a website, all those little things right there. That's good. There's nothing wrong with it. What they said is here's an even better way how to push something forward. Build relationships. And that's what we're doing here today with the one sheet. Connect with communities around the world. I've connected with Bill in bringing him in potentially down the road and helping us with a book chat that we're doing at the same time. Definitely, and it's hard for some of our organizations, and I know we've struggled with it in our school board, it's definitely that compressing, that flattening of your organization and that communication chain opening up and really essentially harnessing the power of your organization. And we're starting to see that in our revisioning work that we're doing with our school board. And the last thing I'll point out is not to read through the whole list, it's a culture changer, and that's what you want to do is to start changing the culture of the school that you're working in. So just some questions for you to consider as we start looking at the tools today. As I've already said in previous slides, what's the learning that you want to see happen? And then the second one is, well, how is the tool actually going to support that? The third thing, is it actually helping you, that tool, or is it going to confuse and cloud your point? Simple thing number 4 is it device agnostic? Are you able to use it? Are your students able to use it? Are your teachers able to use it on a desktop, on a mobile device, Apple, Android, Windows, anything like that? Oh, I should mention BlackBerry as well. And then we were talking about this with Patrick and something else that he's working on. The number 5 thing is when you're using those digital tools, make sure that you've read your terms and conditions. The one thing we talk to our teachers about here on our board is the same due diligence that you would use in planning a field trip and researching where you're going to take your class, where you'd recommend teachers to go. That's the same kind of due diligence that you should be using when you're sending students out or teachers out into that wonderful World Wide Web of resources, and making sure that there's the proper use that's going on. So don't do what many of us do, where you scroll through the terms and conditions as quick as you can and click accept. If it's a new tool you haven't tried before, take the time to go through and make sure that you understand how that tool is going to be used. Back to you, Patrick.
Thanks, Greg. And the other thing that Greg and I have been speaking about in planning for this webinar was the idea that you can produce a document or something for your staff or for students on the acceptable way to use any single tool. But what you're doing there is you're basically going to have to redo that when the next tool comes along. So instead of building kind of rules and procedures to kind of vet tools for one specific tool, like Twitter or any other one, coming up with a list of questions to ask yourself before you use any tool, so that it doesn't matter which tool you're looking at, you're being critical of it before you start. So the first tool we want to share is Docappender. And so for those of you that have used Google Forms before, you will have noticed that the results from the Google form you're filling out now are different from the ones that you're seeing that Greg showed, in that they are in a Word document and not in a Google Sheet. And so what Docappender does is it takes your Google form, and that first question that you answered, whether it's cooperation, communication, or citizenship, as soon as you answer that first question, the form and Docappender know that they are going to put the subsequent information onto a document with that name. So if you clicked communication, as soon as you answer the rest of the questions and hit submit, it knows to take all that information and put it on a Google Doc called communication. And same thing for citizenship and collaboration. And so what we've got schools and teachers using Docappender for is they create a form with all the students' names in it and a doc for each student. And so what happens is, as soon as a teacher selects Greg from the list, maybe checks off one of the learning skills and then makes a comment, instead of it going into a sheet that you can sort, it actually sends that information to a Google Doc with Greg's name on it and keeps all of Greg's info in one document that then you can then share with other classroom teachers or with the parents. So Docappender is a great tool. It's not difficult to use. Lots of info online on how to use that. So when we go back to see the documents again, you'll be able to see what that generates. So why don't we go and have a look at, if you let us share the screen again, Ben, we'll show the collaboration document. Let's see if I can pull this one up here. Collaboration. Okay, everyone, so what you're looking now is this the Google Doc that I was talking about. And when I built the document, all I did was put the title bar across the top with the logos and wrote the word collaboration. And then I saved that document in the same folder that the form is in, called it collaboration, and then Docappender did the rest. So it creates the table, puts the headings in, and as people start to fill out the form, it automatically starts to add all the data into it. So this form will continue to grow every time someone submits a form and uses collaboration as the answer to the first question. Okay, thanks, Ben. If you could go back to the Connect session. Greg, do you want to talk a little bit about the two behemoths?
Yeah, it's definitely the key players for us. Google Apps for Education and Office 365. I know several years ago now, I'm trying to remember, it would have been 3 years ago, CIO at our board and New Movement brought in the Office 365 and kind of it made its way throughout the board that, oh, we're an Office 365 board now, my class, SharePoint, everything like that. So we had started moving that way with some of our online sharing and using documents and teachers were going that way. And then underneath that level, there was the teacher-driven kind of groundswell for Google Apps for Education, the suite of sheets and docs and everything that way that we were growing as well. It doesn't matter realistically which one that you're going to choose as long as you're going to use it to develop those skills. Use it for the purpose, change the learning, change the working in your schools at the same time. We are, as we talk through things, trying to make sure that staff know to keep your corporate communication separate from your kind of classroom communication as well. We had a couple hiccups along the road where a staff member inadvertently shared their exam with their students and stuff like that. So it's just trying to keep those two avenues separate as you go through. But it's definitely the way moving forward. As many of you know, we're using the forms aspect of Google today. I've also hopped in and used Word documents, depending on if I'm doing a TPA with a teacher and they like to use Office 365, so I join their class and follow what's going on and everything that way. So it works out quite well for us. Those are the key ones. And were you going to share your school improvement plan, Patrick, at any point?
I could talk about that now if you want, because that's kind of a good fit.
Pushing your school board forward through using Google Apps.
So what Greg's talking about is we took our school learning plans, instead of it being a static document that you fill out twice a year and then they get either emailed or couriered off to the superintendent. We built all of our school learning plans in Google Drive. So what we did was we created a template for the school learning plan and a template for the learning stories. And the learning stories are the documentation of the learning of all the people that are in collaborative inquiries across the system and in schools. But the key features are that they're all accessible to everyone. So every teacher, every administrator, superintendent can see everybody's school learning plan, and they can also see the documentation of the learning of every inquiry that's going on in the system. So if I'm part of an assessment inquiry in Aurelia and I want to see what the group in Bradford is doing, I can go and look at their learning story. And what we ask is that if a teacher or a principal is in someone else's learning story, what they're looking for is either posing a probing question to kind of push the thinking of the group or to ask for clarification, or they are offering some kind of support or resource. So they can go in, read the documentation of what that group's learning, and ask them a question or offer a resource. And so it's really made the whole teacher learning visible to everyone, and really helped spread good practices around because people aren't doing things in isolation anymore. The other thing we've noticed too is the way people document their learning. If it's only for myself or the group of teachers I'm working with, I write a certain way. But if I know I'm documenting my learning and it's for a wider audience, it changes the way I document. So Google Apps is really, for us anyway, kind of transformed the way we do our school learning plans and teacher learning in general.
Thanks, Patrick. The next slide we're going to get into it, or just cognizant of time here as we're watching. Just another easy tool, and this is where Patrick and I wrestled earlier tonight, was how do you get multiple contributors working on a document so that everyone can still understand it. And one of the easiest ways is Padlet. It used to be called, my memory slipping, Wallwisher. And we just had a really quick bulletin board, threw it up. Our our instructional coach helped our principal design it. And it was just talking about teachers and how they could describe the learning and how it goes on in their classroom. So that's another one for a quick brainstorming, collaboration from your staff members. You can use it in classes and everything as well. When you do download, the Padlet logo is activated, so you can click in and actually see the Padlet that was created on that activity that I was talking about. So I'm not going to go in a lot of detail about that right now. the
So
communication.
go ahead, Greg. So I guess the plan too, and yeah, as Greg mentioned, we're kind of running out of time here, but the tools for communication, again, we were planning on coming back to that to see what's in there, but everyone has access to click on that link at their own time, maybe after the webinar, and see what we put in there. But the hope is that those 3 documents will just grow over the next kind of little while as people put more and more tools into it.
That's really good. I was just actually looking, Patrick, at the communication. Someone's even mentioned Evernote, and a good game changer is just it's in a lot of software now. It's just the simple speech to text that's available for every single person in your school board. Never mind just special education students using Kurzweil and Dragon, but something that's very easy to use. So that's a really good feature that someone's mentioned as well. Really good for French and English language learners. So that's a thank you for sharing that resource. I'd forgotten about it.
And also when we talk about the use of Google Forms and DocAppender, that is where teachers are getting the kind of the most mileage out of it. They are building that form with a couple of clicks. They can pick a student, pick a learning skill, and then click on a text field and dictate into their mobile device or their iPod or their iPad a brief statement about an observation or a conversation they've had with a student. And as soon as they hit submit, it's in that student's Google Doc, and the parents can have that kind of instantly. So using that voice to text has been a powerful tool.
So as we get in, and we're not going to cover all of it right here, everyone is their #1 communication tool. I don't know how many workshops when people talk about what's the greatest tool that's impacted me the most in my learning, it always comes down to Twitter. And of course, I'm sure Patrick would mention some of that there as well. And I can't remember if Patrick and I met face-to-face first or met on Twitter first, but I remember it was one of his innovation resource teachers had put out a question on Twitter about what's the actual value of Twitter. And I was kind of following along with the hashtag that was there. And then Patrick had just tweeted out really quickly, Twitter's like an awesomer machine. You put stuff out there and people make it more, awesomer. So I took that, just a really quick example, and it actually models one of the tools I'm going to talk about later on. Is an example of, here's something that Patrick put out really quickly. Somebody sees it, takes a look at it, they like it, they can flip it around and just take something that was already good, even just a little bit better. So that's some of the value that you can see there. One of the ways that Twitter helps with us is instructional leaders, and I have a history philosophy background, and I know if I walk into my MHF, my calculus teacher's classroom and say, I am your instructional leader and I'm here to help you, I know they're not thinking I'm Yoda and I'm the pleasant one. They're looking at me like I'm from Darth Vader and the dark side, and I don't know what's going on. This actually happened with a math resource, and I'm just going to show you really quickly. And if you could help share my screen, Ben, at this point, please. So this is just really quickly, just to show you, if you ever wanted to share it with staff, the power of Twitter. I have to give you a slight proviso on this example because I actually thought about it, took time. Carol Schiffman's actually my wife. So she put it out really quickly, so I follow her already. She asked, does anyone know an app that will show a tangent and a slope given a curve and point? I just jumped in really quickly. I tagged Alec Kuros. He suggests Desmos.com. I'm forwarding it back and forth. And actually, I'll give you the time start, 2:27 in the afternoon. And as you go through and you see everyone that starts to contribute, some other ideas, it reaches out. Matthew Pierce jumps in. That's forwarded along by somebody else that I follow. And then lo and behold, at 3:04, Desmos itself has now joined the conversation and provided a direct link that answered the question. So Peter Newberry summed it up quite nicely. Just 37 minutes from first request to help from Desmos itself, the power of Twitter indeed. So that's a really good example of how you can use Twitter as an instructional leader to find some of those answers that our teachers are looking for. So that works out really good. You could also use the CC function if you wanted to tag somebody else to pass that message along for you as well. I'm just waiting for the presentation to pop back up here on the screen. Patrick?
Yep. So that's a great kind of segue into this, Greg, which is the power of the hashtag. And so in the chat, I've just put a link for those people that are new to Twitter, one of the easiest things to do is if you just go to Twitter and type in a hashtag, or even if you don't even have to have a Twitter account. If you just Google a hashtag and then the word Twitter, it'll take you to this page. And so maybe if you share my screen again, Ben, I'll show you what this one looks like. So what you should be looking at now is the Untitled Leaders hashtag. And so I just went and typed Twitter hashtag Untitled Leaders, and this is what comes up. You have a choice between looking at what the top tweets are that are using that hashtag, and you can scroll through them all. You can look at the live feed and see what the most recent tweets are. The other one I like to look at is the photos or the media, and you can scroll through and see what people have been sharing on that hashtag. So it's an easy way to follow what's been happening in that hashtag. Okay, Ben, if we could go back to the deck.
You still there, Patrick?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I'm here. Just you can go ahead.
To speed things up, it's another example of we ran an evening of talks, basically modeled after Ignite here in Peel. We just called it Peel Spark. So we use that hashtag to follow the conversation all night. So people were adding Peel Spark to their tweets. And then I showed it as an example. Storify is a great resource for collecting your tweets into a story that you can embed in your website, your blog, to share later on. That's where the power of Twitter was from. It doesn't even do just Twitter. It's Instagram, it's Facebook, a ton of different social media. So it's a really good way for you to slow that pace down of Twitter, because if you're following a hashtag, sometimes it just flies right by, and you can take the time later on and then archive those tweets for yourself and embed them in that Storify and then share that out later. We use here at my school a Pass Proud hashtag, and that's where we just share all the good learning things that are going on in our school at the same time. So that's taking Twitter, combining it with Storify, and using hashtags to really produce something that's pretty impactful. I know that Storifys we share out, trustees have come up and said how much they appreciate those, and they had no idea that happened at Alternative School in our board. So it's a really good way to expand the learning.
So the next slide is Paper.li, which is another tool to curate content. And so when you get a chance, if you come back to this slide deck and clicked on Paper.li, the image in this slide, what you would see is a curation of all the Twitter traffic for the hashtags of our school board. So when you create the Paper.li account, you say, I want all the tweets that have a certain hashtag or from a certain user. And what it does is it just grabs them all and puts them into a newspaper. So you can have that automatically publish daily or weekly. And so we have schools that put it on autopilot, and they just say, here's our school hashtag. And Paper.li goes out and creates a newspaper with headings, grabs all the Twitter traffic, puts it into a newspaper, and automatically sends notifications out either by Twitter or by direct email to a list of people that you have or people that have subscribed to your paper. Go ahead, Greg.
We're going to speed along here. Another one is TAC. Really good way to take that bulletin that you do, your newsletter that you send home with report cards that you email out, and make it more interactive. I know our director of communications here, Brian Woodland, our school board, I can't remember the actual percentage, but he put out a percentage of parents that actually read the school newsletter. And I know when you hand them out, if you really, in high school at least, you walk around the corner and the first garbage can away from your school, you can see all the yellow paper that had your most recent newsletter on. So TAC's a really good resource for that. I use it as well just to document and share learning. So if you click on that image of TAC, it's actually hyperlinked to one that I just put out the other day after our PL day on Monday. just reminding staff of the work that they've been doing. And that was 2 years ago. So I went back and looked at some photographs that I had taken of some old school technology being used at a technology workshop. We looked at Will Richardson's article on Students Not Stuff and their reaction to that article. And I used Dotmocracy with markers and stickers just to gauge our teachers' understanding or at least agreement with some of the statements that were there. So that's a resource for you to take a look at. Patrick had already mentioned that you can go and see the global citizenship resources that people had already started doing later on and come back to that as well. Everything we've been doing here today has really been building our footprint, being a good digital citizen, and it's everything that we do is going to form that. So it's up to us to try to start taking control of it as we go through. And it's a good point to remind our students of at the same time. Some really quick ones as educators that you can do just to start establishing your own. So it's you that controls what comes up when you search Google. I'm fortunate enough that I'm not the most famous Greg Pearson in the world. There's a British footballer that seems to get way more hits on Google than I ever do, so I'm not that concerned about it. But you can create your about.me profile, link it to all your other social media accounts as well. So that's just another simple way that you can spend some time to create your digital footprint as well. As far as a really good way for creating your footprint is the idea of curation. We know that tons of information comes flying at you, great articles from Twitter, gets posted on blogs and things like that. Sometimes I'm very skeptical about what I'm going to actually tweet out. And you want to make sure you're putting out some good stuff when you're curating because you're putting your name behind it and saying, go read this article, go check out this resource, save this blog and that type of idea. So it's very important that you curate what you're actually doing. Multiple platforms to do that. A lot of our students love using Pinterest. I used to use Scoop It. What I've switched to now, just because it's so simple, is Digo. And really what it's talking about is making bookmarks on the go, social bookmarking, research and knowledge sharing. And I use that to share resources out with staff. Ben, if you could share my screen, please. Thank you. Just here's an example of what my Digo page looks like. I've got it all hooked up with another what's it called now? If then that. It sets up the recipes for me as I'm curating. So I've got all these resources tagged with custom tags. So I can share these with my teachers if they want to go and find something on leadership or technology, social emotional growth, talk about mindset or 21st century learning. All the resources are here. So it's a really good way just to show people what you're interested in, what you're reading. For me, this is great. When I found an article, I really like it. And if I want to use it at a PL day later on, like the Will Richardson story, this is exactly what I did. I went back to my Digo library. There's the link. What's even better, here I am at my desktop sharing it with you. I've got Digo on my phone, Digo on my laptop, and Digo on my iPad at the same time. So it's a really good resource. You can just click on, here's leadership, and it's all sorted by different articles that are worthwhile and need to take a good time to take a look at. So you want to make sure you filter through those and curate some good content for your staff members to see and look at. Really quickly about what can you contribute on Twitter. Twitter is the awesomer machine that Patrick had tweeted out, and I made that image. One of the easiest ways for me to contribute initially in a Twitter conversation or to put some content out there was to take things that I had read and go, I'm going to put that to an image. And one of the best tools for doing that, as far as when you're mobile and you're on your phone, is an app called WordSwag. It's just simple. It has a gallery of items. You can insert your text, and then it creates the image, and you can share it right out on Twitter really, really quickly. So WordSwag's really good, and I've actually just showing you a quick example of something that I put out a while back just about accepting the status quo. So really neat ways just to produce that content for yourself. WordSwag's just gone through a huge update, and actually it was a little bit of excitement between an ITRT here and me sharing it because I love creating these things. And I'll put them right there as part of my own learning when I'm at workshops and seminars and keynotes about what my key rememberings are for those sessions. The next resource that I'm going to share with you is Canva. It's a fantastic resource. There's an iPad app for it, and it's a desktop resource to create images for yourself. You can create Twitter posts, presentations right in it, headers for your Twitter profile, your Facebook page, tons of examples for you to use. So it's really good for creating those custom images. And actually, Canva's the tool that I use to create that image that I shared with Patrick on Twitter. What I really like about Canva, though, is as far as your digital footprint and creating those individual images, much like WordSwag does, for Canva, what I like about it is it actually creates a profile page for you that you can share as well. So if I could share my screen again, Ben, just really quickly show you. And again, it's linked in the presentation. Here's my Canva profile page. So any image that I want, I've made public, and they're available for others to see. I send my teachers to it. Really good to see where I'm coming from, the direction that I have, some slides that I've created. I've made full presentations in Canva as well. Some really good examples that I've shared on Twitter, and I've used it to kind of push my learning agenda here at school with staff as well. So it's a really good resource. High quality images as well. This is the example for today. I created this. Technology won't help get rid of your problems, but man, it's certainly going to magnify them for you. So ideas like that are easily shareable. So it's really good that way. So I really enjoy using Canva, developing a profile for myself online as well.
Great, thanks, Greg. So the last kind of item we're going to look at for global citizenship is this idea of the blog. And what it comes down to for us is about learning and leading in a visible way. And so there are lots of opportunities. If you want to check out this blog from Peel, they've done something that a few boards have done and more are catching on, is this project where you open up the blog to either the entire system or just to students or to staff, where they blog about their learning on a daily basis. So they provide opportunities for students and staff to have a larger audience for their writing, but it's an opportunity to share things that are happening in the system. And the best ones are the ones where the blog is open to students to share their learning every day. It's that audience factor is you can't really overestimate how powerful that is. And then the next slide is just a copy of another blog. So this one is mine, but it's what I find interesting about blogging is we're all busy. We've all got so many things on the go. I blog better when there's a prompt, or when I'm with a group and we're talking about an issue and someone prompts me to write a post. Left to my own devices, I store all kinds of started blogs, but the ones that never get finished. But if somebody is there to support you and prompt you, that makes a huge difference. And the next one is a great example of a collaboration where the people at Asamuk have built this kind of platform where leaders from all over can share their learning. And they do a lot of great work around getting administrators and school leaders together on different projects. And they do what Greg and I talked about early in the webinar, is they will go right back to the beginning for you and start you off at the beginning and do like a 10-day kind of little either challenge or workshop around a tool and get you started. So if you haven't gone to Asamuk, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, they did, Patrick. I think it was last year, the 10 days of learning Twitter. I think it was last year. I had, 4 or 5 staff that told me officially, yeah, I did that. That was awesome. So it's really good learning opportunities. Doesn't just have to be for admin. It's just system level leadership. Some really good quality stuff coming out of there. Mark Carbone and Donna Miller-Fry have done some fantastic work in getting that going initially, and all the others that have jumped on as well. We've already talked about some of the power of the hashtag. Came out of the initial institute 2 years ago. Definitely take a look at the On Ed Leaders hashtag. That's the one that Patrick mentioned earlier this evening when he showed you how to simply search through Twitter. Another great way to get connected and see what's going on, even more so internationally, is the Connected Principals chat found at CP Chat. And more recently with George Couros' new book, some really good stuff going on about innovators' mindset. So that's another good way to get connected and see what's going on around the world for us as far as educators and leaders. Really quickly, as we start to wrap up for this evening, reminder of next webcast. Hopefully, if Patrick and I didn't completely bore you senseless or wonder why you wasted your Tuesday afternoon, you'll be willing to sign back up again for Patrick and I's next session on May the 10th on assessing and monitoring the effectiveness of technology-enabled learning. Again, you can do that through all the notifications that are coming out through your representation as well. So hopefully you see some of these names again on Tuesday, May the 10th. And what we're going to leave you with today is some learning challenges for you to take away. And we've talked about some of the tools today. If you can do all four, that's absolutely fantastic. That would be your 4+++++. If you want to do 3, 2, 1, it's up to you. If you don't want to do any, that's your choice as well. What we're just saying is take the opportunity, get on Twitter, try calling out someone on Twitter and say, hey, check out the slide deck from tonight, or check out this resource. Share out the forums that we've done tonight, especially the document that Patrick put together with DocAppender, and what other tools we can use in building the competencies that are in the ministry document. Take some time, download the WordSwag app, download the Canva app, or create your profile, and create your first Canva image, and then share it. Create your first WordSwag, and then share it out there. And then definitely take a look at any of the resources we talked about, whether it's DGO, and just start posting one thing to it today. That's all it takes. Any of the sharing that you're going to do, just use the OnEdLeaders hashtag, and then we can all follow along in each other's learning as we go today. Patrick, any closing words?
No, I just thinking that I'm going to have another look at Adobe Connect and see what happened to my my video, and I got booted out once today, and I'm sure that wasn't you or Ben that did that to me. Really enjoyed getting ready for today, and I'm really interested to see what is in the collaborative documents. I can't wait to have a look and see how people are using tools in ways that I've never thought of. So I'm really looking forward to those documents.
Yeah, that was awesome too. Like just the DocAppender is not something I'd used before, and as Patrick and I were talking, he brought it up. So it was just fantastic learning for myself as well. So really good to start the sharing today, and hopefully keep it going in the community that we've got.